Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. So glad to join you.
Great to have you here, Andy. Andy works with organizations all over the world, helping them to improve their project management skills and their abilities to lead and deliver. And his clients include the United Nations, so it doesn't get more global than that. He's a coach, he's a trainer, and he started his career as a software developer, moving into management. Since then, he's become the author of 3 books, but he's probably best known as the presenter and guiding mind behind the People and Projects podcast, which has a phenomenal amount of content. And if you're in need of any continuing professional development like PMI PDUs, then you can fill your boots with this stuff. And every week, I think it is, Andy, you interview someone new with something new to say. So there's a wealth of great stuff there.
Including Mike Clayton as a guest.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the one to listen to. And I think, the title of Andy's podcast, People and Projects podcast, tells us all about his approach. It's about people and projects. The two are equal. And that's why I wanted to speak with you, Andy, today about managing and dealing with difficult stakeholders. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's great to have you here, but we do need to start at the basics. Could you please give us a simple definition of what we mean by stakeholder and what the pitfalls are that you see?
It's funny you ask that because I'm sure if we looked at a dictionary, it'd say those who hold a stake, which doesn't really help us much. But interestingly, if we just go on a practical basis, like if we were to audit a project, there's probably a form that says stakeholders. And normally what I see is a list of like 2 or 3, maybe up to 5, and they tend to be heads of different departments. So the head of R&D, the head of sales, the head of operations, those are stakeholders because they have a stake, their departments have stakes. But I really appreciate the Project Management Institute's definition when it has like 3 major parts to it. Who are those people that can affect us? And certainly the heads of departments could affect us. Who are those people who are going to be affected by this project? And then the third one is kind of interesting. Who is it that perceives they're going to be affected? Maybe they're not, but they still are freaking out and we still have to manage them. So by that definition, it casts the net far wider than when I was starting in project management. I would probably, if I look back, I would honestly say I probably looked at the people who are most directly impacted, not the ripple effect people. Yeah. And it's often these ripple effect people that we don't think about. And when we don't think about them, we inflict all kinds of chaos onto their lives. And then there's resistance, and then there's undetected risks, and we're stumbling across these people. So I think getting a sense of who could slow us down, and who could impact us, who could speed us up, who like for example, every once in a while I hear somebody go, they're just an admin. It's like, oh my. To slow a project down.
That's someone who doesn't understand.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You tick off the gatekeeper, your project's going nowhere. So I think this sense of, wait, let's think a lot more broadly. Who is it that could impact us for good or bad? And it's not judging it nearly as much as let's just be aware of it. Who else are we impacting? And who else? And who else? And who else? And it, just like we're never really done identifying risks until the end of the project, I suppose, we're really not done identifying stakeholders because we might uncover some more along the way. So I think that awareness helps a lot when it comes to running projects. I know it has for me.
Yeah. I like that metaphor of the ripple because if you get a bowl of water and you start a little ripple in the center, eventually that ripple reaches the outside and then it comes back towards the center. And that's exactly it. And
that's it.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right about the definition. I always tell people the more widely you can frame your definition of what a stakeholder is, then the better you will be. Don't get hung up on narrow definitions you might find.
Well said.
Anyone who has any interest whatsoever in the project, start with them. I think that's brilliant. So that's you told us where we're one of the places where we can go wrong. Are there any other traps we can fall into, either in identifying stakeholders or how we go about communicating with them?
In the 6th edition of the PMBOK guide, I haven't seen it in the 7th edition, but there's references to a power impact matrix or power how involved is somebody and how much power do they have, power interest matrix. And so I always feel compelled when I'm teaching that to classes of saying, okay, the total number of times I've used a power interest matrix in the real world is 0. But because if you really get that definition that you and I just talked about, there'd be so many bubbles on this bubble chart, they'd almost be indiscernible who's who. But one of the interesting things about that particular matrix, and I don't remember which paper it was that talked about this, but it talked about if somebody is in the lower left, so low power, low interest, as opposed to low power, high interest. Anyway, how do you deal with these different ones? And the one that I have found I've gotten burned by so much because I didn't understand it early in my project management career was the low power, high involvement. It says, keep informed. Okay? And so much of what we do, right, Mike? So much of what we do is keeping people informed. We update dashboards, we send out status reports, we have meetings, we keep people informed. But the upper left, high power, low involvement, is keep satisfied.
Yeah.
And if there's one common problem I see, and I'm tempted to do it myself, and I see it especially in new project managers, is we keep informed thinking we're keeping satisfied. Yeah. So I don't know, Mike, anything off the top of your head of the difference between keeping informed and keeping satisfied from your perspective? Like what would, if you do this, you're keeping informed, but if you do this, it's keeping satisfied. Anything come to mind?
Sometimes, for me, sometimes it's actually the difference between how you keep them informed. If you've got people, and I use a slight variant on the grid, I use their power to affect the project as one axis, but the other axis is their attitude to the project.
That's good.
If they're supportive or if they've got concerns.
That's good. Yeah.
But regardless, if I've got a stakeholder who I might consider has low ability to impact the project, so that's I might keep them informed through the, if you like, the mechanistic ways, the highly what's the word I'm looking for? Transactional ways. We produce a report, we circulate the report.
Yeah.
But those people I want to keep satisfied, I'm going to keep them informed in a much more personal way. I'm going to make time to talk with them and listen to them so that I'm telling them what's going on, but I'm also listening to their response, because that way I can calibrate. Are they actually satisfied? And if not, I can start to diagnose and ask them questions. So that for me is the key. It's more about how you keep people informed than actually doing anything to outright delight them, because people love to be listened to, don't they?
Yeah, that's good. In fact, like keeping informed might be update the dashboard. Keeping satisfied, like you said, might be, hey, just a heads up, on Friday, the project status is going to go to yellow.
Yeah.
Here, I just want to give you a heads up. Or, hey, I know you're going into a meeting this afternoon. Here's some latest information. It's how'd you say, more personal, right? It's more personalized, more customized to that person. And it's so easy to think, well, I sent out the status report. Right? I updated the dashboard. Don't you read your email? And I think the answer is no. Like sometimes people don't, right? Sometimes people don't go and look at that stuff. So,
and the tip I give, if you actually spend time talking to whatever label you're going to put on them, but your primary stakeholders, the key stakeholders that you think deserve more listening time, more time with them. If you do that first, you will know what their concerns are and you will have addressed them, hopefully. You then effectively have the checklist of topics that you can then circulate more widely to the broader range of stakeholders. If you try and do it the other way around, then your high important stakeholders will get that before you've engaged with them personally, and you've missed the chance to be personal in your approach. Yeah,
that's so true. I can think of a chief information officer who he's just known that if you give him any, I think it was the number was 3. If it has more than 3 pages, it doesn't matter what it is, he's not going to read it. He'll like send it right back. And so, depending on what someone was trying to get across to him, if they didn't personalize it, if they just kept informed, blast out information, and they didn't customize it, they're not getting an audience. They're not going to build a rapport. They're not going to build trust. And you're going to kick out this. There's a healthcare supply company in near Chicago where I live. And somebody said their sponsor wants all graphs in pastel colors. Isn't that funny? Like I could see graphs versus tables or whatever, someone having a preference. But so they said it's Easter every day, like pastel colors. But they said as long as they did that, that executive felt like it was tailored to them. Isn't that crazy? But that's more of not just keeping informed, that is keeping them satisfied. Because if we don't do that, then often the upper right of that one is you got to manage them closely.
Yeah.
And then that gets to our time and energy and stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes to a broader principle that we should be designing our reports around the needs of our primary stakeholders, the people who are going to read those reports. And on big projects, I will do a redesign periodically by actually surveying people and saying, how's the report landing? Because it's an easy thing to do. It's not a time-consuming task, especially as you can put more junior staff members on it. Give them the opportunity to engage with some senior stakeholders. It's great for their career and their self-confidence, and you get a better product at the end of it.
That's so good. One of our clients, she's kind of known for saying, you write to the reader. You write to the reader. And that's good advice for email. That's, who is the reader? Who's the intended audience? But I like your periodically just thinking, is this reporting helping, or is it just Frankensteining, like getting bigger and we're adding more and more and more? It's like, wait. What are we even doing with these metrics? Does anybody even read these metrics? What decisions are we making off these?
Yeah. I mean, I did one large project where we got to the stage where we knew that every senior person was going to read the front of the report, the first executive summary, to see if they were named on it. Because and if they weren't, they could ignore the whole thing, or their business unit was named on it. But what we then figured out was that we could actually save ourselves a lot of trouble. Instead of naming them and shaming them, phone them up. So we're just producing the report, and got some bad news for you. We're writing the executive summary, and any chance we could have a couple of minutes discussion about what's going to go in it? And we could head off so many problems and get things fixed in the 24 hours between having all the reporting data and finalizing the report. And that, so again, that is about recognizing that if you can create the right relationship where you're not saying, I'm going to thump you and start an argument, but you've got a chance now to not be seen by the executive on the front page. And they became very, very thankful of that, because sometimes the senior stakeholders aren't aware what their junior teams are doing. And the junior teams are reprioritizing stuff, and maybe not with their permission. So again, it's back to building rapport, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think we're actually due to be talking about difficult stakeholders. And I remember that my first thought when you suggested that this would be a good topic for us to talk about was, what do you think of when you're thinking about difficult stakeholders? What does it mean to you?
There's always danger in using labels, right? Like the type of, but with that clarification, but the type of labels that come to mind are obstacles. Like people, like I don't even remember where I read it years ago, Mike, that said there's only two reasons why people get upset: a blocked goal, or someone stepped on our significance. Now, I'm sure we're missing all kinds of other ones, but I think those two are instructive for us. Because when we're leading a project, man, I mean, we own this thing. This is our baby, and then we deliver it, and somebody's like, your baby's ugly, or they're getting in the way of us making progress. So I think of sometimes difficult stakeholders, not purely just personality, but they're blocking us. They're obstacles. And usually that can come with, some emotional baggage too, of their styles are different and things like that. But I think if we think of it as just kind of like, to your point, of if we had to kind of classify it around, it's probably safe to say those people that feel most difficult, they just seem to be getting in the way of progress.
And I think you're right about labeling, because when I started training, I got some very good advice from an experienced trainer. Said there are no difficult participants in a training room. There are just trainers who aren't flexible enough to deal with those behaviors. And
that's brilliant.
And that's really nice, because actually, you're right. If you label someone as difficult, you get what you look for.
Absolutely. You can find all the data you want.
Difficult label on someone, then everything they do, you will interpret as being difficult. And they're just trying to do the best for themselves. And there are difficult behaviors, and there are some people who exhibit them more often. That's the reality of humanity. And I think for me, that's how I think about difficult stakeholders. They are the people who you have to work that much harder to deal with, to engage with in a constructive way. So let's say you've got someone who you think of as a difficult stakeholder. You're working hard mentally not to label them, but you know that you're having trouble. So where's your starting place? How do you work your way into handling the situation?
Yeah, well, if you were talking to 20 years ago, Andy, it would have been write them off. Just write them off. But that doesn't really work very effectively. So my starting position now is I want to win them or neutralize them, and that's not like in the Game of Thrones or Sopranos. Neutralize, but it's like if they're, let's say they're a red, I want to get them to green. Or yellow, sometimes a win. Maybe they're not an advocate, but they're not a detractor. And so starting with this mindset of like, I'm going to take it as a challenge. So instead of writing them off, which I think is maybe within our human nature of clearly they're an idiot, clearly they had a troubled childhood, or instead of making up stories about all that stuff. So what would it take? And here's just a quick example of this. Is I've got a friend who he went from a really good project management job to a really good program management job. Great company for his resume, bump in pay. And before his first week was done, he had to present to a governance committee. And one person on this governance committee, Mike, ripped into him. I mean, swearing at him, disrespectful. Like, how can you not know this? Is this guy still on probation? Can we fire him? Like, who? Like, how does this person slip through? Like, insulting, like truly insulting. And what my friend wanted to say is, like, I don't even know where the restrooms are yet. Like, give me a week. But he took it as a challenge, and he's like, I want to win this guy. And so, but the thing is, the second week, same thing happened. For those that are listening to us, and I'm sure this is probably true for both you and me, it's certainly true for me, is you run across sometimes people who shake your confidence. And all of a sudden you can start doubting yourself, like, man, maybe I'm not as good as I thought, or maybe they're right. And we start believing that person's lies. So, but he still took it as a challenge. He started doing some homework. He started asking people about him, not in a gossipy sort of way, but just, can you help me understand? Like, or one guest on the podcast, he said, become the boss whisperer, which is his way of saying, watch other people interact. Like, who does that difficult person listen to? How do they communicate? So just being more aware. So he did some homework, and people go, oh, you had to present to that guy? And my friend goes, yeah. They go, and you lived? Barely. And they go, oh yeah, he treats everybody like that. So as he did more homework, what he realized, it wasn't a personal thing. And I'm not giving any room for people that are truly bullies or toxic. So I'm not, even by saying this, I'm not saying, so just realize it's not personal, because it felt really, really personal. And why companies keep people like that, I don't know. But still, what he learned was that this guy, his management philosophy was a murder board. You just rip into people, and if there's anything that's left standing, well, maybe we consider that. Once he learned that, he learned how to navigate this, and he's still at the same company. He learned how to navigate with that difficult person. I'm sure they're not going out for drinks afterwards, but he learned how to navigate that process. So there's something about mentally, cognitively, emotionally, like staying in the game of what would it take? What would it take?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to something you said, it's important, I think, for people, because most of the people who are watching my channel will be at the earlier end of their career. It's important for them to know that will still potentially happen to you all the way through your career. It may happen more often and more easily when you've got less experience under your belt, and therefore less confidence. But potentially it can happen at any time. It's not because you've got low levels of experience or you're younger. It is because there are some people out there who genuinely do have that style of behavior. And I think you're right. I think the days when companies and organizations tolerate that, certainly here in the UK and where you are in North America, I think those are drawing slowly to a close.
I think so.
But it's going to be a while. It's a big change, and it's going to take a while. And there will be people like that in life, even if they're not necessarily in senior positions in companies.
You said something earlier, Mike, that I just want to call back to, because I thought it was brilliant, that people want to be listened to. Yeah. And I had a guy named Tim David. He's an influence guy in the podcast a while back. And one of the things he said is people become difficult when their needs are not being met. Yeah. That's an interesting, just kind of overarching principle. They're being difficult because there's a need not being met. Now, maybe it's like, all right, I'm not I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know what their needs are not being met. But he said, when in doubt, assume that their missing need is to be listened to, appreciated, and loved. Now, we're probably not so interested in the loving, but still the listen to thing. I think that was a wise thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that could, that could be one strategy with that example you cited, is give them a damn good listening to. Yeah. Because their approach is to give you a damn good talking to. Yeah. And yet actually maybe they just don't feel that they feel the only way they can be heard is to take this particular approach. It's rather like with children who misbehave, they can get into a pattern where they don't feel they're getting the attention they want by being good. So they can get the attention they want by being not good, and not rewarding that behavior of that misbehavior with attention is one thing. And then to start rewarding good behavior. So by listening to people and maybe actually making time with that stakeholder and saying, I want to get my presentation to you right. I want you to feel like you understand it and it's giving you the information you need. So give me some guidance. People also want you, they get flattered when you ask them for help.
Yeah, right. Yeah. In fact, Tim David actually has that in his book. He goes, I need your help. He goes, there's something wired into us as humans that when someone says that it kind of drops the defenses a little bit. It's not a pompous, because the arrogant don't realize they need help, right? But he, what's his name? Dr. Mark Goulston. He's a clinical psychiatrist who wrote a book called Talking to Crazy, which is a funny name. It's like when you're working with somebody who just feels like they're like certifiably like irrational. Yeah. I think to my friend, this guy seemed irrational. But one of the ideas that Dr. Mark Goulston says in his book, Talking to Crazy, is it's a little bit when someone is fishing, like you set the hook and then you let the fish run a little bit. And that's kind of backs up your idea of listening. Like, it's hard to argue with someone who's a good listener. And so Mark says the equivalent of letting the fish run is stare at their left eye. Now, I know you have a global audience, and so there are cultural implications with eye contact that vary. But the idea is that if left to my own devices, if somebody is ranting or getting inside, insulting, I might be signaling, it might be leaking out of me that I think you're an idiot, but if I'm like with genuine curiosity, and I found no discernible difference between left eye and right eye. Mark says it's not perfect science that the left eye is the right brain, but he just says, just force yourself to keep listening. And with genuine curiosity, it's hard to argue with somebody who's a good listener. If they truly are trying to, maybe they don't even agree. We don't always have to agree with that person, but I have this goal, and I felt this regularly, Mike. I can be accused of a lot of things, but I don't want to be accused of not listening to them. Like I said, I felt this regularly, but if we could have that as an aspiration, at least, like we're trying to understand, even if we don't agree. And I think it's the first rule, Rapaport rule, the first Rapaport's rule that is, if this is not word for it, it's pretty close. Be able to summarize another person's position so well that when you're done, they go, I wish I would have said that. Or I wish I would have said it that way. Isn't that good? Like, you don't have to agree with it, but can I summarize what Mike is saying here? Or could you summarize what I'm saying so well? They go, oh man, Mike, that's so good. I wish I would have said it that way. And that's an aspiration. We don't know if we can do that, but that's the goal.
Yeah. I like that. And I like the way I like to look at it is actually silence, is the power of silence. If you let someone speak and then you don't feel the silence when they stop, then they feel the urge to fill the silence. And sometimes when they've been going on and on and on and on, they then start to undermine their own position because they know that they've been crossed the line. And it's also, the other thing is, if they're expecting you to come back with a witty or an aggressive response, and you come back with that straight away, it's kind of message that I'm giving you. If I respond to you straight away, is what you said was obvious. I knew what you were going to say, therefore it's not very important. It's not very clever. It's foolish. Whereas if you give someone silence before you respond, the subconscious message you're giving is, I had to think about it. Therefore it was valuable information that you gave that I need to consider before I respond. And so it's that bit of respect. So, and I just feel that silence is probably the most powerful communication tool we have. We underuse it because we're as scared of it as the other person. But the person in a conversation who is more comfortable with silence, I think, has the upper hand.
That's good.
If they care to use that. And so it's a great trick.
Mike, I can think of an example real quick of this one. Was I was teaching to a team in it was in Ghana, so West Africa, and most of them spoke French. And I speak we and baguette. Like I don't know French, so I felt like the engagement wasn't quite the same. And so one of my colleagues at the UN, I was just asking him, like, I feel like it's not quite as engaging as I want, and he said, leave more time after asking the question, more silence. Like I hopefully there'll be a lot of valuable things that are said in this discussion here today, Mike. But yeah, I think your point on silence there, if we would really grab on to what you said, it can help us in so many contexts, even if it's not difficult, but we're making it more difficult because we're not allowing the silence. I think that's brilliant, Mike.
Yeah. And that idea about having the upper hand or an advantage, that kind of puts me in mind. I think you have some thoughts about there's a famous Sun Tzu line, isn't there? I might get it wrong, but about keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And I think you've got kind of perspective on how that can work in the stakeholder arena. So
I do, Mike, because here's the deal. I guess I've seen this temptation in me, and I've seen it in other people. Like, if they're going to act that way, I'm not going to invite them to the meeting. And so all of a sudden their bad behavior spills over to our bad behavior. And that's not good. But there's a dynamic that this was explained to me by a guy named Dr. Nick Morgan. He's a communication guy. And he goes, what our temptation is, if let's say we're back in the office. Okay? Let's say we're back in the office. And we have to be in a meeting with the difficult stakeholder. Our temptation will be to sit across the table from them or as far down the conference room table as we can, right? Because, it's kind of an intimidating sort of situation. Yeah. And so one of the things Dr. Nick says is, he goes, no. That difficult stakeholder, you go and you sit down right next to them. So just off the top of your head, Mike, what would be some advantages, do you think, of doing that? Of sitting right next, keeping your friends closer, your enemies closer. So once again, not accepting the label of enemy, but the idea.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I have on another channel made a video about the psychology of meeting table positions.
Interesting.
And of course, it's very hard to get confrontation with someone you're physically next to because you've got to turn your whole body. And of course, that becomes, you're then competing with your desire to be confrontational with them against your desire to conform to the norm of a meeting where you're sitting facing into the table. So, but yeah, absolutely. I always say you can't build agreement out of disagreement. So you need to start somewhere, and it's far easier to get that first germ of an agreement when you're facing in the same direction, and therefore you've got the same point of view. Psychologically, you've got the same point of view because you're facing in the same direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, it's not us versus them, like a table of separation. It's kind of like we.
Yeah.
And one person said, I like it because if I'm sitting across the table, I don't have to look them in the eye. And so there might be some of that, but I think there's something about this we. Like, if you're on a lift, with somebody, and that we act differently with proximity. Yeah. Right? And so there's something about that. Maybe they're less likely to rip into my project, or if they do, at least I'm there and I can defend it or respond to it. But I feel like there's a little bit. Well, actually, this is where Nick goes in the conversation. He says, if you sit far down the table, and it might be fun to put a link to your other video on this one, because I'd like to watch that one about your table seating thing. But he goes, what happens is sometimes we start to contract, is the term that Nick used, and we start looking weak. And to some people, that's blood to a shark. It's like, I can see I'm getting to him. So I think there's something about, to the degree that after a pandemic, hopefully somebody will be listening to this and that'll be long in the rearview mirror. But that is, go up, shake their hand, sit down right next to them. Good to see you. And just realize they may still say things against the project. And what we're saying is, hey, glad you're here. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation. We're not going to let them get to us, I guess, is
and it's a bit like Lemmings, isn't it? If you've got a bunch of lemmings heading towards the cliff and one of them is saying, no, I've got a map, we should be going the other way. Right. If you're at the front of that group of lemmings, the least you can do is listen to the lemming with a map, because maybe, just maybe, they know something you don't. And that stakeholder, if you refuse to engage with them because you've mentally put a label on them that says they're difficult, you're missing all of the information they may have, which may be motivated for your self-preservation, not for theirs. And also, I think you talked to earlier about, we have to meet our needs, and we get objections and resistance when people don't feel their needs are met. And I think one of the needs we have is to be in control of our environment. And if I'm starting a project and you're on the receiving end of the project, I'm suddenly taking away a whole load of your control. If I can sit next to you and find an area of the project where I can give you some control back, saying, Andy, I'd like your advice on this, or how should we be configuring that? As soon as you get some control, you're much more relaxed about relinquishing control in other areas.
Such a good insight. Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's a good example of making sure we invite them, because we give them an opportunity to have some autonomy to speak their position. It's not a fight, us versus them. It's a dialogue.
Yeah. But sometimes it does go wrong, and it gets a bit tighter. So what are your thoughts about escalation in terms of, I guess, we're not talking about getting fists out, but actually the rhetoric can start to escalate, and also the conviction, the level of convictions can start. So what are your thoughts on that, Andy?
Yeah. There are times I feel like I hesitated too long to escalate. So I think I can see both sides of that in the past. So there are times, like, let's say something's on the critical path, and if we are not making progress, we may indeed need to escalate. But this is a lesson I should have learned a lot earlier. And I learned it from Dr. Alan Cohen. He wrote a book called Influence Without Authority. And one of the things he says is never escalate while blindsiding someone. And so that's a little bit like a sibling going and running, tell mommy and mommy, daddy on the other sibling. How's that going to work when they're back down here? And so what I like about that advice from Dr. Alan Cohen is, well, here's a practical example. This is a guy from Microsoft who he told me, he goes, we couldn't get agreement. We couldn't get agreement between him and another person. And it was starting to delay the project. What they decided to do was they wrote the position paper for the other person. Yeah. Which is brilliant, isn't it? So it's like, all right, here's how I would summarize your position, and here's how I would summarize your position. And they did it so that the other person, kind of Rapaport-like, would say, yes, that summarizes it. And then they went together. Now that's like a level of maturity that rarely shows up in, corporate world. But even if you don't do something like that, there's something about saying, listen, I know we aren't seeing eye to eye on this. It is going to delay the project if we don't have a decision. I don't think you feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable. Let's escalate this. But do you want to come with me? If you can't make it, is there an option that you want me to advocate for? Or, you know what I'm saying? So it's not this blindside escalation where I'm trying to, which can come off like a threat. Yeah. It's more along the lines of, hey, we're not making progress, so we need to escalate because things are going to continue to get delayed. But come with me, or let's do this together. That's a very trust building piece of advice. Yeah,
I like that. It reminds me of Charlie Munger, the investor at Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's business partner. Always says that you don't really understand an argument, you don't understand a situation until you can put the other side's argument better and with more facts and with clearer reasoning than they can. And if you can do that and you still believe your argument is stronger, then you're in a position. I suppose ultimately it's walking the world in someone else's shoes, taken to the logical extreme in our context. I really like that idea of writing their argument for them.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant, and it's rarely done. And I think it'd be really difficult to do it without advocating for your own position. But I pushed on the guy and he goes, yes, we do that. I don't get the sense that's a Microsoft wide thing as much as how they decided to do it. But I think, wouldn't that be an interesting thing to try?
It would.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the only context where I've seen anything like that is in the change control process, where you might kind of, as a project manager, articulate the pros and cons, but or the business case, I suppose, because of change request. It's fundamentally a mini business case, isn't it, for a change? But actually, for dealing with exceptions and problems, I like that a lot. That's great. We've had some great tips, but we probably need to wrap up soon. Before we do, any last thoughts or ideas that we can share with the audience?
Here's one last one. And that is, it came from the discussion with Tim David as well. He says, the cardinal law of persuasion is to never make the other person feel stupid. And why I find that so helpful. I can think of all kinds of examples, but I'll spare you on this one. But there are times where I think most of us are not going to go up to another person and go, you know what? You're stupid. You're an idiot. We don't say that, but it leaks out of us. It just so easily leaks out. It's like, well, finally you agree, or and so there's something to be said for these really difficult people with the label in mind. These people who are obstacles, or whatever term we want to use, to say, wait a second, don't bully them into an answer. Don't threaten them. Don't do anything that could ever make them feel stupid. Because if we do that, it's only going to make the task worse. And I mean, I feel like almost everything we've talked about today could apply to culture at large right now. What's going on in the news. And there's just so much of the, you're an idiot, you are, and all the labels. Well, we can so easily fall into that same trap in the workplace of, our team knows better. You're an idiot. You're stupid. No one believes that. And Tim also had this line about gratitude, and it's along the lines of people stop wanting to help if there's even a hint of ingratitude. Yeah. And so once, let's say we get to a resolution, just say, listen, I know that wasn't easy. Mike, thank you so much for working through this with us. I think we've kind of learned a lot as we've gone through this. That's a respectful thing. Yeah. There's something about, if we can end well and with gratitude, because I had to learn this the hard way, Mike, is that gratitude that goes unexpressed is experienced by other people as ingratitude. And so if I get to the end and it's like, all right, good, transactional, like you said, all right, finally signed off, it's going to be experienced as ingratitude. So I think there's something about that point of making, give people, Cialdini says, Dr. Robert Cialdini says, give people a reputation to live up to. I know this is difficult, but I think this is going to help us in the future. Things like that, of ending that difficult thing. Well.
Yeah. Well, Chris Voss, the negotiation expert, always says that actually how you end the conversation or the email or the dialogue has a far greater weighting on how people will perceive it and you than any other part. So always end on an up. And so I absolutely right. And it comes down to the fact that we're project managers. It should be far more important to us to make progress than to be right.
Yeah, so well said. Yeah.
So, Andy, I mentioned People and Projects podcast. I'll mention it again. Can you tell us how people can access it and and engage with you on social media and through other means?
Yeah. It could be any podcast app. Look for People and Projects podcast. And typically it is less about technical project management and more about the people side, like we were talking about before. And we have a new initiative called Lead 52, which is a 52 weeks of content, just one a week. Get an email on Monday, and it's something you can read in 5 minutes or less, and it gives you things to think about during the week. So getlead52.com is that initiative. But, LinkedIn is a great place to follow Mike. It's a good place to follow me. It's just so many people that have a heart for helping people learn how to deliver. So, connect with both of us and join in the conversations. That'd be a tremendous blessing to me to be able to hear from people.
Great. Well, it's been an absolute delight as always, Andy. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content. So please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.